You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, my guest is David Livermore. David is the author of the new book, Digital, Diverse, and Divided: How to Talk to Racists, Compete with Robots, and Overcome Polarization. David is a renowned social scientist devoted to the study of cultural intelligence, a scientific model for working with people from different cultures. He is a frequent speaker and advisor to Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and foreign diplomats. And David has worked in over 100 countries. At a time when society is more divided than ever, I thought David would be the perfect person to ask how we can bridge divides and achieve more together, despite our differences. In our conversation, we explore David's research on the power of cultural intelligence, and David shares practical advice that leaders, teams, and people everywhere can use to work through differences and accomplish ambitious goals. I want to make one thing clear. Our conversation is not about the complex, controversial issues that divide us. You are not going to hear David and I attempt to reshape your opinion on any particular issue. What you will hear are actionable tips you can implement right away to bridge divides in the boardroom, the classroom, or in your next conversation with a friend at the grocery store. I learned a ton from David and hope our conversation is a stepping stone to bringing us all a little closer together. So let's pull the tarp and get straight to David Livermore. For those listening, what is cultural intelligence? Let's start there.
Most of your listeners will be very familiar with the ideas of IQ and EQ, and cultural intelligence is another form of intelligence. We actually researched it as that, and it's basically, do you have that sixth sense that can pick up on what's going on when you're interacting with someone who comes from a very different background than you? So traditionally, our work has been almost entirely working with international businesses, helping people who are functioning on global teams or blowing in and out of a lot of different global cities. More recently, it's been focused on as well the domestic diversity conversation. And then this latest book saying, well, even if it's two guys that might look like they come from similar backgrounds on the outside, how about when you get beneath the skin and have very different views on some of these sensitive topics and issues?
You mentioned, David, there are different viewpoints on very sensitive issues. We're more polarized and divided, it seems, as a society than ever before. How does some of the research and work that you're doing in this space, how does it help us get on a path to overcoming some of the divisiveness and polarization that is impeding us in so many ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's more than just a sense that we're more divided and polarized than ever before. The research bears that out. And actually, if I can back into responding to your question for a moment, as I mentioned just a minute ago, like almost all of my work throughout the past 25 years has focused on helping global executives deal with these, kind of classic issues of how do you help an Indian and a German work together. And increasingly, as a citizen of the world and the US was watching this, like, no matter what the topic, every week it's polarizing us, I started to think like the same issues I've been teaching executives and organizations, seek to understand, don't rush to judgment, are actually the same kinds of things that can help us on these polarized issues that exist within our own neighborhoods and workplaces.
So let's backpedal there. You talked about a couple of concepts there, seek to understand. So take me through that, like what, in its simplest form, whether you're a leader, whether you're just moving about your everyday life, we encounter people with different viewpoints who come from different places and have different perspectives. How do we come to those conversations better suited to bridge any divide that exists?
Yeah, so if you allow me to kind of talk about how the cultural intelligence model gives us the guidelines to do that, we know there's 4 capabilities that the culturally intelligent have, whether it's these international differences or the kind that you and I are talking about. And the first one of those is just the drive and motivation to overcome the difference. And so a practical way that we could use it in our everyday interactions as leaders, family members, etc., is just to find out, is the other party even open to a different perspective than what they have? So a simple question I often use when I'm talking to my polarized counterpart is, would you be open to a different perspective on that? And I usually find that they'll at least be like, well, sure, I'll at least listen to it. And if they don't, if they're like, hell no, then it's like, well, then it's not even worth either of us spending the time and energy to get into it.
What do you do with the person who says hell no?
I mean, I would say for the most part, I state my opinion and move on, because there's actually all kinds of research that says if you still try to convince the hell no person, you're just calcifying their viewpoint. Now, knowing your audience also includes a lot of business leaders. And in fairness, if that person works alongside of me, I don't necessarily have the option, right, of saying hell no. So I think the other way we might look at it is go, okay, we might not agree on this, but we have a bigger issue that we have to agree on to kind of get to terms on. So how do we kind of put aside some of our differences on this particular issue and say we both need to get to point B?
You were going through some of the competencies. You had talked about motivation, and then I kind of interjected there with a question.
Great.
What's next in terms of the competencies?
So the second one is knowledge. So like, again, if we talk about it traditionally, it's what does a German need to know for working effectively with a Chinese? In this case, it's to what degree do I actually understand your perspective? And so let's say you and I have very different views on Trump. We won't get into whether we do or what those are, but you state your opinion, I state mine. Can I say back to you, okay, so you view January 6th as X. Have I accurately characterized your perspective without any value-laden pejorative terms, just like, here's the way you view what happened there, and you coming back to me? So it's just quite simply, I mean, it's not rocket science, but there is science behind it that says when we actually seek to engage in this perspective taking, it enhances our knowledge to say, oh, okay, maybe the caricature that I saw on social media wasn't entirely fair of the people who viewed that situation that way.
Do we as leaders, do we as people often overgeneralize? We hear something and then we kind of bucket that person or that perspective in with a lot of other things that may or may not be true?
Yeah, I mean, think about what happened in COVID, right? It's like we pretty much started to make conclusions about your political affiliation based upon whether you were wearing a mask or got vaccinated. And it's like, I've met lots of people who I was wrongfully assuming what their political ideology was because maybe they had a very different reason why they were or weren't getting vaccinated. So that's one example of, and it's kind of human nature. I keep using these international examples when I said, like, teach a German person what they need to understand about the Chinese, like, what, all billion Chinese? Like, can we really lump a billion people into one category? So that's part of what cultural intelligence seeks to do, is say, okay, we have some sophisticated generalizations about what might tend to be true if you're an East Coast guy living in DC, and here I am living on the West Coast. But then how do we get beneath the surface of that and go, okay, but is that really your story? Does that really characterize how you interact and how you want to do business?
How do we, like, tactically speaking, kind of make sure that we're checking those assumptions at the door and not overgeneralizing, not assuming because I live on the East Coast and you live on the West Coast that we have a certain predisposition to something? How do we do that?
Couple thoughts come to mind. One is just being aware ourselves of how much we don't like that. So to the very point you just made, like, I'm a white guy, straight, PhD, who grew up in New York and now lives in San Diego. Any one of those labels could cause people to assume all kinds of things about me. And I'm like, don't put me in a box. But then the other side, I would say, is the more that we have direct experience with people who are different than us, the more we start to go, wow, like, I've interacted with 15 different Indian professionals in my workspace and no two of them are the same. So the more that we start to have direct experience with people of different cultures or different ideologies, the less inclined we are to generalize, and the more that we start to realize, okay, nuance is actually a part of, maybe there's aspects of you that fit the DC area, and then aspects where you're like, no, actually, this isn't very much who I am at all.
David, I'm curious, Are there examples? You've worked with countless Fortune 500 companies and diplomats and executives. Are there practical examples, without naming names, of course, are there practical examples where you see these issues that you're describing limiting the ability of that leader to succeed or limiting the ability of an organization to move to the next level? What are some of the limitations that you see when these problems are not solved or these issues are not addressed?
A couple thoughts, Andrew. So first off, you know, it's really difficult to be an organization that can appeal to millennials and Gen Z if you aren't adept at understanding the so-called diversity conversation. So increasingly, it's like it's a non-negotiable. Maybe my generation is like, take it or leave it. But even though the research doesn't necessarily demonstrate that a millennial's better at building inclusive workspaces, you're going to have a really hard time attracting top talent if you aren't good at it. I think another one, maybe more to the point of some of the sensitive issues, is there's companies like Basecamp that came out a couple of years ago forbidding any discussion in the workplace about sensitive topics. And what happened? 30% of the workforce resigned the next day. So especially now in the digital remote working arena, like the lines between work and personal life are so blurred that as my Twitter notifications are coming through talking about the January 6th insurrection, but meanwhile, I'm being told by my boss, we're not going to discuss any of those issues at work. Like, shit, did you see what just happened? And, so yeah, I just think it's an unrealistic kind of notion now if you say don't bring any of it into the work. And of course, there need to be ground rules and boundaries. Like, we don't want someone spouting off about all their political views on reproductive rights or, forgiving student debt in every team meeting. But organizations are having to address that.
David, you talked about the hybrid and the virtual piece there. And that's a topic that has come up in a lot of conversations that I've had over the last, number of months, year or so. And what I'm curious about is you've already talked about the challenges that companies and individuals have communicating and understanding each other and bridging these gaps. I'm curious, what kind of wrench has the virtual hybrid work thrown into all this? It has to make it more challenging.
I mean, so my work has most often been how do you deal with the challenges of diverse teams working together? And we've always said, but now we have Exhibit A, that the more virtual, the more remote, the more distributed your team, the more amped up those challenges become. And, simple example, if I layer both the digital workplace and remote along with the sensitive issues, there's a lot of colleagues of mine who are people of color, in particular African Americans, who talked about what it was like to jump on a Zoom call right after George Floyd was murdered. And like, okay, like, am I supposed to compartmentalize that? And other people are, so are we on task for the project? And like, did you all just see what happened? So yeah, and yet, I've had some people push back with me on even making that statement. Like, okay, so what's the right answer to that? The minute an African American joins the call, she would be like, are you okay? How are you feeling about George Floyd? Like that doesn't feel right either. So it is this whole new skill set we need that's become compounded now that we're dealing with different time zones and cultures and building relationship that, we click it off at the top of the hour and aren't going out for drinks afterward to have any kind of social kind of grease that lubricates some of those difficult conversations.
David, I'm curious, and I think so much of this it comes down to communication and the ability to communicate and to listen. And your book, as I mentioned at the top, Digital, Diverse, and Divided, is a fantastic book. And I was immediately drawn in by a quote that you had in one of the first couple of pages. It was a Martin Luther King Jr. quote, and it says, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. And I'm wondering, why is it that communicating is something that's so difficult for us?
Yeah, in part, I think we're so quickly inclined to go, are you a friend or a foe? And if you're a foe, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to separate myself from you. And, it's kind of back to your question a few minutes ago, like, how do we actually overcome some of this? Part of this is like, the more that I begin to have direct experience with people, the less easily I can say anyone who's anti-reproductive rights or whatever also fits into this other caricature. So yeah, I guess the qualifier I would make on it is I think communication is where it absolutely begins. We can't end there with it though, because I think sometimes people are frustrated, like, oh, kumbaya, let's all come together and talk it through. And that's where I very much, and more importantly, the research really bears out that there needs to be some kind of problem that we're working together to solve so that our communication is oriented, especially in the workplace, toward we're all trying to get to X. So we don't have to agree fully on our different views or even our views of how to get to X, but somehow communicating around a shared objective can help with it.
So, I mean, CEOs, leaders of teams, coaches have, people with diverse perspectives that are, like you said, are just not going to agree on everything. How do we, besides, kind of marking a common goal and working towards it, what are some of the tactics? What are some of the things that a leader can do to get people with different views and perspectives on the bus rowing in the same direction towards a common goal?
Yeah. At the risk of giving you a cliche, my colleague Adam Grant has a piece that I have milked over and over again that says, argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. And I think just that kind of mentality going into a meeting is, we don't want you to shy away from your diverse input. Argue passionately your perspective on this. Then shut the hell up and let Andrew now argue his point. And where this mix in with the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is knowing that, if I'm going to generalize, guys like you and me, for lots of reasons, will probably not be too reticent to argue like we're right. And oftentimes it's our female counterparts or people of color who are going to be like, well, is this really a safe place for me to speak up? So I think leaders have to find ways to really create space to say, Livermore, don't be the first person to speak up. We know you're going to argue like you think you're right. We'd like to hear from this individual because they have some really good input as well. So I think it's creating those boundaries. And so it's kind of zooming in and out on, okay, let's zoom wider than our differences to what's that goal we're trying to reach. Now let's come back in on them and argue passionately your point of view. Now we're going to have to kind of go mid-range focus to figure out how do we get from the big goal to our different perspectives and how can we actually use those differences rather than like shying away from them.
I love that. Argue like you're right. Listen like you're wrong.
Great. The quote you like the most is not mine. It's Adam Grant's, but great.
Wow. Well, you used it. You used it beautifully. How do we listen better?
What? No, sorry. Oh, gosh. I mean, part of it, I think, is that communication 101 of, can I paraphrase back what I just heard you say? So maybe it's even asking people to take a moment and do that. I think for leaders, it's also making sure that you've really aligned expectations and clarified. So another quick example, one time I was working with a group of executives at Coke, and they had decided that one of their key leadership competencies that they wanted to develop across Coke leaders was to get everyone to act like an owner. And so, kind of have a leader feel like they have skin in the game. It's they're, when they're filling out an expense report, expense things as if it's your own money, take risks as if you get the idea. But the interesting thing was, I was sitting in on this meeting and some of the individuals who were visiting from the Thailand office pulled me aside and they said, wonder if you can help us a little bit because we're still confused on even this whole competency of act like an owner. And I'm like, well, what's confusing about it? And I'm not going to say this is true, but they said, well, in our context, owners are people who are playing golf all day, drunk on the golf course and randomly calling into the office. And now I'm trying to tell our leaders that that's the way they should act. And so if simply the individual leading the meeting had stopped to say, today we're going to talk about acting like an owner, everybody write down in one sentence what you understand that to mean. It creates some of that listening opportunity that says, let's make sure that we just don't rush beyond here's the stated outcome. And do we even know if everyone even has the same understanding of what that outcome is?
What's remarkable is that something that's so well intentioned and that is being, implemented in theory for all of the right reasons could create such consternation and such angst in people just because of false assumptions of someone assuming that everybody is going to view this concept of acting like an owner in a positive light or understand what it means.
Yeah, that's similar to that point. I've worked with many companies that have introduced a speak up campaign. So, to your same point of leaders realizing the value of listening, we want people to speak up, assuming that everyone would be like, yes, thank you. They want us to speak up. And instead found that a lot of mid-level managers and individual contributors were like, oh, crap. Now, if I'm not the person always mouthing off in a town hall meeting, it's going to be viewed as I'm not really all in or I'm engaged. So the intention, to your point, is good. It's just, are there multiple strategies for how to get people to speak up? Not everyone's going to be comfortable in a town hall meeting with a couple hundred speaking up, but is there a way that through a poll they can offer their voice, or through collective input they could do so?
David, I want to dig into your career a little bit more, and
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, you're obviously passionate about these subjects. You've been studying this and working in this space for a very, very long time. What inspired you initially to get involved in this type of work and start really looking at these things in a detailed way?
So there's the safe answer and the vulnerable answer. So I'll start with the safe one. And just quite practically, I was doing leadership development on behalf of an organization in the US, and I was responsible to take it globally. And as I did it, I just kept brushing up against people who were like, this is a very American model of leadership. We're going to need to adjust it. So that's often when I talk about birthed my interest in, what's a capability, which eventually became cultural intelligence to help do that. The more personal answer that might be a bit incongruent for some of your listeners is, I grew up in a very different world than the one I live today, very conservative fundamentalist Christianity. I was an aspiring missionary, and I was going to convert the world to see the things the way we did. And while I've evolved quite a bit from that mindset, it was actually that originally that kind of evoked in me this curiosity about different cultures, how people live, what they believe in, and those kinds of things.
And was there a moment that you can remember where you kind of started down this path and it reinforced for you, this is my life's work, this is where my passion is, this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I think one of the first was, other than the US and Canada, I had never, been anywhere until I was 19 years old. And it was at 19 years old on a study abroad / missions trip, to be quite honest, that I had gone in with a whole lot of hubris. People told me that at 19, with 1 year of university education, I had more formal education than a lot of the Peruvian leaders would have that I was going to be meeting in Peru. And so I went in, super confident. And then I start talking to these leaders, even leaders along the Amazon jungle who maybe didn't have formal education, but they were way smarter than me, understood way more about life. And it was the first of many moments that just gave me pause, like, wait a second, maybe listening first rather than coming in as a 19-year-old to tell a 45-year-old how they need to lead their school or something, is kind of one of those moments that for me forever stuck with me, and then countless more over the next 30 years after that.
What aspect of your work would you say is the most challenging?
I think it's people who dismiss it as, okay, isn't this just kind of common sense? And I get that. Like, it's not a lot of the stuff we've talked about today. It's not earth-shattering rocket science, and yet we still do it so poorly. So I think the challenge is, it can feel fairly like simplistic, and yet teams getting along with each other. And to your point earlier in the broadcast, just us getting along as fellow human beings in the same nation or extended families is so difficult. So I think that would be the one that I find most challenging.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, David, because so many of the conversations that I have with people from all different walks of life, it's amazing how things that either seem really simple or that are really simple or seem like common sense are very challenging. And a lot of times success in any discipline comes down to being able to do the simple or straightforward or things that really are common sense, just a little bit better than everybody else and a little bit more consistently than everybody else. So it's interesting to hear you say that there are people out there that say, oh, this is common sense, this is simple, but that's okay. It's simple and it may be common sense, but you're doing very important work to put this all together for people.
Well, I appreciate that. And I sometimes make it akin to, it's also very simple to understand the importance of flossing our teeth. But many of us, until a week before we have our dental cleaning, haven't done a whole lot of flossing the teeth, or fill in the blank, eating healthy, whatever. So it's sometimes I think we've tried to solve this issue, people like me, academics, by flooding people with a bunch more information. It's like maybe it's willpower and application and discipline that's far more about what makes this not as easy as it looks than just like, oh, I never thought before about actually getting people to communicate would be useful.
David, my dad is a retired dentist. I've had many conversations over the years with him about the flossing. He's very passionate about the flossing.
And do you floss every day?
I do floss.
Good.
But there are many times, earlier in my life when he would talk about, how important it was to do something that was just so simple.
And is it legit that like it's linked to heart disease? I mean, my dentist always tells me this.
We'll have to ask a dentist to come on and figure that out. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that.
Inherited all of that knowledge.
I have not. I'm going to stick with my areas of focus, and I'll keep flossing.
Wise man.
I'll keep flossing. So, David, before we wrap up, what do you credit most for your success?
My mistakes. They've been my number one tutor. They're not fun, but a willingness to go, I blew that. So how do I not do it again? So off the cuff, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind.
10 years from now, when you think about the book that came out earlier this month, where are we? Where is the conversation? If you're successful getting the message out that you want to get out, where are we?
Boy, I really hope 10 years from now, we're looking back at the 2020s and going, wow, remember how bad it was back then? And thank God we've moved a few clicks forward. And I really don't put my hope in that on politicians or the media changing their way. I really think it's those of us in leadership positions, either by influence or organizationally, like one organization and one team at a time, getting people to say, different isn't bad. Different is an opportunity to learn and discover. So I hope that at a grassroots level, we see ourselves as having not been so quick to assume the absolute worst to someone just because they automatically have a different view than we do.
David, this has been such a pleasure. You're doing such great work. And with the research that you do, the messages that you get out to the world, I know we're all going to be pulling the tarp together, hopefully in the same direction a little bit sooner in a lot of different aspects of our life. So keep doing what you're doing. We'll have to check in again in a couple of years, in 10 years, and see where this conversation continues to go. Thanks for your time, David. It's been fantastic speaking with you about all of this.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today's a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.